My wife asked for a divorce? I want the house. The car's everything, Harper said, like she was reading a shopping list. My lawyer begged me to fight. I didn't, I said. Give it all to her. Everyone thought I'd lost my mind. At the final hearing, I signed it all over while she smiled until her lawyer leaned in and whispered 5 words that made her scream. Before we start, comment where you're watching from, tap, like, and subscribe, and share this story, who I am, Dylan, my work, my life. Before, I'm Dylan, 33 years old. Born in Ohio, raised on the kind of streets where people waved at strangers and believed a handshake meant something. I wasn't rich, not growing up. My dad worked union hours and came home with grease under his nails. My mom stretched grocery. Money like it was a magic trick? What I did have was a stubborn streak and a brain that wouldn't stop arranging problems into lists. I could solve. By my late 20s, I'd built a small logistics and fulfillment company that served a handful of regional brands, nothing glamorous but steady. Warehousing contracts, route optimization, inventory forecasting. The kind of work nobody brags about at a party, yet everybody depends on when they click buy now and expect a box on their porch in 2 days. I liked it because it was simple in the best way. You keep your word, you deliver, you get paid. Then you do it again. Success didn't show up as yachts or champagne. It showed up as a 2-story house in a quiet suburb outside Columbus, a backyard big enough for a grill and a cheap fire pit, and 2 cars that felt like proof I'd climbed out of the life I was born into. A black SUV I used for work and a silver sedan Harper insisted was classy, like cars had social standing. We had a mortgage, sure, but it was manageable. I was the guy who paid every bill early because late fees offended me on principle. Harper and I had routines that made our marriage feel normal. Saturday mornings, I made pancakes, too much butter, and she would take photos for her social media. Sunday afternoons, we'd do a budget date, her term, where we'd sit at the kitchen island with coffee and I'd show her what was coming in and what was going out. She'd nod, ask questions, sometimes suggest we upgrade something, new patio furniture, a better refrigerator, a vacation that looked good on Instagram. I'd tease her, call her my lifestyle consultant, and she'd smack my shoulder and laugh. I didn't mind being the steady one. I was proud of it. My whole life I'd watched adults blow up their futures because they couldn't keep their impulses on a leash. I promised myself I'd never be that guy. One kept folders of paperwork, I backed up receipts, I saved emails. Not because I was paranoid, but because I'd learned the hard way that memory is a terrible witness. Years earlier, before Harper, I'd been burned by a partner who swore he'd handle the books. He handled them, all right into his own pocket. I spent a year cleaning up a mess that wasn't even mine, learning what liability meant in the real world. That lesson changed me. It made me calm. It made me careful. And it made me the kind of man who could listen to his wife say, I want everything, and not immediately explode. Because when you've seen what a single signature can do, you stop thinking of paperwork as boring. You start thinking of it as fate. That's who I was before the divorce. The guy who believed stability was love, and love was a life you built quietly, brick by brick, without needing applause. On weekdays, my world started before sunrise. I'd roll out of bed at 5:10, not because I loved mornings, but because the warehouse did. I'd check route dashboards on my phone, confirm the overnight scans, and make sure nothing had lit up red. When the system said delayed, it meant a driver was stuck in snow, or a pallet was mislabeled, or a client forgot to send the pickup authorization. Those little errors were like termites. Ignore them, and suddenly the whole structure collapses. At the warehouse, my guys teased me for being the owner who still wore a safety vest and walked the aisles. Boss man, they'd call, half joking, half proud. I knew their kids' names. I knew who was paying off student loans, who was trying to buy their first house. I'd built a company with them, not above them, and that mattered to me. It also mattered legally because I'd learned what a judge sees when they look at a business. Not your dreams, but your payroll obligations, your contracts, your liabilities. Harper didn't come to the warehouse much. When she did, she'd stand near the entrance like she didn't want the dust to touch her shoes. She'd smile at my employees, but it was the kind of smile you give a waiter polite distant, transactional. Later she'd say, "You work too hard. You should be enjoying what you built." And I'd agree, because who doesn't want to enjoy? But I also knew the truth. You don't get to enjoy a machine until you understand every moving part. At home, I was the one who handled the quiet adult stuff. I scheduled the vacuum maintenance. I knew the password to the utility accounts. I set aside money for property taxes so we wouldn't get hit by a surprise bill. Harper said she appreciated it, and sometimes she did. But sometimes her appreciation sounded like entitlement. "You're good at this stuff, Dylan. That's why we work." If I'm honest, I like being needed. It fed the part of me that grew up watching my mom worry. Being the steady man felt like redemption. I thought if I kept the ship stable, love would stay on board. I didn't understand yet that some people don't want stability. They want leverage. The irony is, I wasn't a controlling husband. I didn't track Harper's spending line by line. I didn't tell her what to do. I trusted her with freedom because I believed trust was the point. But trust doesn't mean blindness. And my document everything habit wasn't about suspicion. It was about respect for reality. Reality doesn't care about vows. Reality cares about what you can prove. Meet her, the charm, the ambition. The cracks: I met Harper at a friend's rooftop party in downtown Columbus. String lights, cheap beer, loud music that tried too hard. She was standing near the railing with a glass of wine, laughing at something someone said, but her eyes were scanning the room like she was doing inventory. When she looked at me, it felt like a spotlight snapping on. Harper had that kind of beauty that wasn't just physical, it was intentional. Hair perfectly effortless, makeup that looked natural but definitely wasn't. Nails done in a color that matched her outfit without being obvious about it. She asked me what I did, listened like she cared, and then asked a follow-up question. That proved she'd actually understood my answer. That was her superpower. She could make you feel interesting, and then make you feel lucky she noticed. We talked for hours. She told me she'd grown up in a small town, hated feeling trapped. Promised herself she'd never be at the mercy of anyone. I admired that. I was a self-made guy too, and her ambition felt like a mirror. When she said she wanted a life where she could choose, not beg, it sounded like confidence, not a warning. The first year together was electric. Harper turned ordinary days into events. She'd text me in the middle of a Tuesday, "Wear the blue shirt. We're going somewhere." Then she'd take me to a new restaurant, order like she was starring in a food show, and make me laugh until I forgot I had a warehouse shift at dawn. She met my mom and charmed her so hard my mom started calling her sweetheart, like she'd been adopted into the family. But even early on there were tiny cracks in the shine, like hairline fractures in glass. Harper didn't ask, "Are you happy?" as much as she asked, "Are we progressing?" She loved the idea of building, but she defined building in a very specific way. Bigger, newer, more impressive. When we drive through a nicer neighborhood, she'd say, "Someday," not like a dream, but like a schedule, and she had a habit I brushed off as curiosity. She asked money questions the way some people ask about movies. Casual, almost playful, but with a sharp focus. How much did I make last quarter? Was the house appreciating? Were the cars paid off? Did the company have assets she could put on a vision board? She would say it with a laugh, then tilt her head, waiting for the answer like it mattered more than the joke. I told myself she was being practical. My dad always said love without a plan was just a crush with rent due, and Harper had plans. Detailed ones. When we got married, she stood in a simple white dress and promised we were a team. She said she wanted partnership, loyalty, a home filled with laughter. I believed her. I wanted to believe her. Because when someone looks at you like you're the doorway to the life they've always wanted, it's hard to notice when they're measuring the doorframe. The cracks didn't show up as screaming fights. They showed up as little moments. Harper's smile fading when I said no to an upgrade. Her impatience when I talked about saving rather than spending. The way she watched other couples and judged them silently, like she could see their bank statements. Still, I loved her. Or at least I loved the version of us I thought we were. And for a long time, that was enough to keep me from seeing the truth. Harper didn't just want a life with me. She wanted a life that looked like victory, and she wanted to make sure her name was on the trophy. A few months after we started dating, Harper invited me to meet her friends at a brunch spot that served avocado toast like it was a luxury product. Her friends were bright, loud, and obsessed with manifesting. They talked about promotions and relocations, about never settling. Harper fit right in. She watched how the others reacted to me when I said I owned my business, and I saw a flash of satisfaction on her face. In that room, I wasn't just Dylan, I was a status marker. Later, on the drive home, she rested her hand on my thigh and said, "I like that you're driven. You're not like guys who just drift." It sounded like admiration. It also sounded like a checklist item being confirmed. When we moved in together, Harper insisted on redecorating almost immediately. She didn't ask if the couch was comfortable. She asked if it looked high-end. She'd scroll through home design accounts and point at white kitchens and open shelving. "This is the vibe," she'd say. I would laugh and tell her our kitchen was fine. She would smile back, but her eyes would go somewhere else, like she was imagining a different life layered over the one we had. The money questions got more specific. She'd ask about the business's structure. Is it an LLC? Are you protected? She'd ask about my credit score, my insurance coverage, the way the house was titled. She asked about my parents' estate plans once, casually, like it was trivia. When I raised an eyebrow, she kissed my cheek and said, "What?" "I'm being responsible." I remember one night, lying in bed, Harper tracing patterns on my chest with her fingertip. She said, "Promise me something." I asked, "What?" She said, "Promise me you'll never leave me with nothing." I've seen women get left with nothing. The sentence sounded vulnerable. I held her and promised because I thought I was calming. A fear. What I didn't realize then was that Harper didn't fear being left with nothing. She feared not having control. She feared being the person who had to ask. When I proposed, she cried real tears, not staged ones. She said yes before I finished the question. For a moment I thought, okay, maybe I'm wrong, maybe she loves me in the purest way. Then she pulled back, looked at the ring, and said, "This is perfect. It photographs so well." She laughed afterward like it was a joke. I laughed too because I didn't want to be the guy who nitpicks a happy moment. The wedding was beautiful. But Harper planned it like a campaign. Every detail had a purpose. The venue for prestige, the photographer for image, the guest list for optics. She wanted it to feel like we were ascending. My family loved her because she was charming. Her family liked me because I was stable. I thought we'd found balance, and for a while we did. We had nights where Harper would curl up on the couch, barefoot, hair messy, and talk to me about her childhood like she trusted me with the raw parts. Those were the nights I fell in love again. Those were the nights that made me ignore the mornings when she'd stare at our bank app like it was a scoreboard. Looking back, I don't think Harper set out to be a villain. I think she built her identity around winning, and she couldn't separate winning at life from winning at love. She didn't know how to be safe without being on top. I just didn't realize she'd eventually try to win against me, the hidden problem. The house is a trophy, and a trap the house was Harper's favorite, not because it was where we lived, because it was what it represented. She called it our forever place, but she didn't talk about the kitchen where we cooked together or the living room where we watched movies. She talked about the curb appeal, the resale value, the way the entryway photos would look from a certain angle. If you walked through our neighborhood, you'd think it was the perfect American picture: trimmed lawns, kids on bikes, dogs that barked politely. Our home had fresh paint, a porch light that warmed the front steps, and a backyard Harper kept camera ready. To her friends, it was proof we'd made it. To me, it was a roof and a mortgage and a lot of responsibility, what Harper didn't understand. What she never bothered to understand was that a house can be a trophy and a trap at the same time. A year before she asked for the divorce, I'd refinanced part of the mortgage into a home equity line of credit, a HELOC. I did it for the business. Warehouses don't run on vibes. They run on cash flow, and sometimes you need liquidity fast when a client's payment is late, but your drivers still need paychecks on Friday. The HELOC gave me that cushion. I used it responsibly, paid it down, kept everything documented. Harper knew there was a refinance, but she treated it like a boring footnote, not a live wire. Then there was the repair issue. Our house looked perfect on the surface, but beneath that, the plumbing was aging and the foundation had a hairline crack that worried the inspector. Nothing dramatic yet. But in real life, yet is where disasters live. I'd gotten estimates. I'd scheduled work. I'd even started a file labeled Home Projects in my desk drawer, with quotes and timelines and the kind of details Harper never read. On top of that, there was an insurance situation. After a severe storm the previous spring, we'd filed a claim for roof damage. The claim wasn't fraudulent. The damage was real, but the paperwork turned into a slow-motion headache adjusters, inspections, back-and-forth letters, and the kind of delays that make you wonder if insurance companies are allergic to resolution. There was a clause about coverage and repairs that hinged on who owned the property at the time of final settlement. And then there was the part I didn't talk about at dinner. The part that kept me awake. Taxes. My company ran clean. Payroll was accurate. Sales tax filings were up to date. But years ago, back when I'd been cleaning up that partner's mess, there was one quarter where something got filed late. Not wrong late. I'd fixed it, paid penalties, and moved on. Or so I thought. Then my CPA called me one afternoon and said, "Dylan, I need you to come in. There's something in the mail from the IRS." When someone says IRS, your body reacts before your brain does. My stomach dropped like I'd stepped off a curb I didn't see. It wasn't a criminal thing. It wasn't an audit that would destroy me. It was a lien notice tied to that old issue and administrative action that could attach to assets if certain steps weren't completed in time. My CPA and I had already started addressing it. We submitted documents. We negotiated a resolution path. Most importantly, we mapped out how the lien would behave if ownership changed hands. Here's the thing most people don't know until it's too late. Obligations don't care about your feelings. They care about names on paper. They care about timing. And sometimes the moment a property transfers, the problem transfers with it like a shadow that follows whoever's holding the flashlight. I told Harper none of this in detail, because every time I tried to talk about unsexy realities, liens, clauses, contingencies, her eyes glazed over. She wanted the house the way people want a diamond ring, bright, simple, symbolic. She didn't want the paperwork that came with owning it. So when she said, "I want the house," she thought she was demanding a prize. I heard something else. I heard a woman volunteering to carry a burden she didn't know existed, and that's the moment my calm stopped being patience and became strategy. The CPA meeting that confirmed my suspicions was on a Tuesday afternoon. I remember because I had to reschedule a driver onboarding to make it, and because the sky outside the CPA's office was that dull gray that makes everything feel heavier than it is. My CPA, Ramona, had a voice that was calm in a way that made you trust her. She'd been doing this for decades, and she treated numbers like they were a language of truth. She set the envelope on the desk between us. "This isn't a crisis," she said, before I even opened it. "But it's not nothing." I read the notice 3 times. The wording was clinical, but the implications were sharp. A lien, if triggered, could attach to property interests. There were dates, thresholds, and the kind of phrasing that leaves no room for "I didn't mean to." Ramona pointed to a paragraph and said, "See this? Timing matters. If there's a transfer of ownership, it can change who holds what risk." We went through my assets like we were mapping a battlefield, the house, the helicopters, the cars, the business accounts. Ramona asked, "Is your marriage stable?" The question landed like a brick. I hesitated. She didn't press. She just nodded, like she'd seen that hesitation before. On the way home, I sat in my truck in the parking lot and stared at the steering wheel. I wasn't thinking about revenge. I was thinking about protection. Harper could be demanding, sure, but would she really try to take everything? Would she weaponize my careful work against me? I told myself no. Then I remembered the way she'd asked about titling, about transfers, about speed. I remembered her impatience when I talked about obligations. and I felt something in my chest tighten into certainty. That week, Harper asked again, out of nowhere, if something happened between us, how would the house be split? She said it like she was asking about a hypothetical movie plot. I answered, carefully vague on purpose. She pouted. Then she kissed me and said, "I just like to know what's fair." I started pulling records quietly. Not to hide them, but to have them. Copies of the mortgage paperwork, HELOC disclosures, insurance claim correspondence, utility account statements. And then, on a hunch, I checked something I'd never checked before: attempts to access my online banking from an unfamiliar device. There were a few. The bank had blocked them, thankfully. But the attempt itself told me someone had tried. I didn't accuse Harper. Accusations without proof are gasoline. Instead, I changed passwords, added security, and watched. Harper got bolder. As months passed, she'd bring up taking control of finances. She'd talk about friends whose husbands hid money. She'd say, "I would never let that happen to me." She wasn't describing fear. She was describing strategy. That's when I understood something crucial. Harper didn't want the house because it was our home. She wanted it because she believed owning it would mean owning the story, but the story of a house isn't written in paint colors. It's written in liens, clauses, and responsibilities. And once I saw that, I realized I could do something most people never do in divorce. I could let the other person choose the weight they didn't bother to measure, the negotiation table. Dylan's calm becomes the weapon when the divorce negotiations started. Harper showed up like she was walking into a closing meeting for a deal she'd already won. She didn't cry. She didn't hesitate. She brought a folder, color-coded tabs, and a confidence that felt rehearsed. My lawyer, Miles Kessler, met me in his office first. Miles was the kind of attorney who looked permanently tired but sharp, like his brain never stopped running even when his body begged for sleep. He practiced family law long enough to recognize patterns. He listened to me describe Harper's demands, then rubbed his forehead and said, "Dylan, she's trying to take the entire tablecloth and all the silverware. We need to push back." He laid out options: contest the division, demand financial disclosures, argue the value of my business, protect my retirement accounts, negotiate the cars. He talked about strategy like a coach drawing plays. Then I said the sentence that made him stare at me like I'd spoken another language. "No," I told him. "Give it all to her." Miles blinked. "Dylan, I'm not asking you to be vindictive. I'm asking you not to be reckless. Fight." I leaned back in the chair, hands folded, voice calm. "I'm not being reckless. I'm being precise." He started to protest, but I held up a finger. "Listen, she wants assets. She understands house, cars, anything that looks like a win. Let her have them." Miles exhaled hard. "You're the client, but I need to say this clearly. Everyone around you is going to think you've lost your mind." "I know," I said. The negotiation meeting happened a week later in a sterile conference room that smelled like printer, toner, and anxiety. Harper sat across from me with her attorney, Victoria Sloan, a woman in a tailored suit with eyes that didn't blink much. Victoria smiled politely, but there was nothing warm in it. It was the smile of someone who expected to leave the room with more than she walked in with. Harper began listing demands like she was reading items off a menu. The house, the SUV, the sedan, the furniture, a portion of my business accounts, anything that was acquired during the marriage. She framed it as fairness, but the words were sharp. Miles spoke up. "That's not equitable, Harper." Harper didn't look at Miles. She looked at me. "I'm done compromising, Dylan." Victoria added, smooth as silk, "Given the circumstances, my client is seeking a clean separation with no ongoing entanglements." I almost laughed. No entanglements? Harper had built her entire argument around entangling herself with everything that could be valued. I nodded slowly. "Okay." The room went silent. Miles turned his head toward me like he needed to confirm he'd heard correctly. Harper's eyebrows lifted. She glanced at Victoria, then back at me like she couldn't decide if this was a trick or a surrender. "Okay," she repeated. "Yes," I said. "If you want the house and the cars and the furniture, you can have them." Victoria's posture changed a fraction. Not much, just a subtle tightening in her shoulders. She wasn't celebrating yet. She was searching. And the business? Victoria asked. I met her gaze. You're not getting my company. You're not getting my contracts. You're not getting my client list. That's not on the table. Harper's mouth tightened. So you'll give me everything except the part you actually care about. I smiled faintly, not cruelly, just like someone amused by how predictable a story can be. I care about more than you think. Victoria leaned forward. Then what are you keeping? I slid a single document across the table, something so small Harper almost missed it. I'm keeping my retirement account, my 401k. That's it. Harper scoffed. Fine, keep your little old man money. Miles stared at me like he wanted to drag me out of the room, but Victoria's eyes flicked to the paper, then to me. She wasn't fooled. She could smell that I wasn't panicking. She asked more questions about valuations, about timelines, about transferring titles. Harper grew impatient, pushing the process forward, insisting on speed. Harper wanted everything. In writing, fast, with signatures. She wanted the win to be official, and I kept nodding. Inside, I was doing math, clauses, dates, filings, and one quiet truth I hadn't said out loud yet because I didn't need to. I wasn't giving Harper assets. I was giving her liabilities, dressed up as trophies, and I could see, for the first time, exactly how the story would end. After that first meeting, Harper went on what I can only describe as a pressure campaign. She texted Miles directly, even though he wasn't her lawyer, saying things like, let's keep this civilized, and tell Dylan to be reasonable. She sent me long messages late at night, paragraphs that flipped between cold demands, and wounded victimhood. You always cared more about your business than me, she wrote one night. Then in the next breath, just sign and we can both move on. Don't embarrass yourself by fighting. She also started rewriting our history in real time. She told friends I was emotionally absent. She implied I was controlling. She hinted I might be cheating. None of it was true, but truth doesn't matter when someone is building a narrative. Narratives are currency. Ethan called me after hearing one of Harper's stories. Bro, what did you do to her? He asked, half joking, half concerned. I told him nothing. He didn't believe me. That hurt more than I expected. At one point, Harper showed up at my warehouse unannounced. She walked in like she owned the place, heels clicking on concrete, and asked to see my office. My operations manager Lisa looked at me like he wasn't sure if he should let her in. I nodded. Harper sat in my chair, glanced at the wall where I kept contracts pinned, and said, "This is what you love." Then she stood, went behind my desk, and opened a drawer like she had a right. She found nothing because I'd already moved everything important. She smiled anyway, like the attempt itself was a win. When she left, Luis said quietly, "Boss, you want me to call security if she comes back?" I swallowed my pride and said, "If she comes back, yes." Miles was furious when I told him, "This is why you fight," he said. "She's not negotiating in good faith." "I know," I replied. "That's why I'm letting her overreach." The next negotiation meeting was even more aggressive. Harper demanded not just the cars, but maintenance payments for them. She demanded the house plus a cash payout for emotional distress. Victoria argued with confident legal language. Miles countered with statutes. Harper rolled her eyes. I kept my voice steady. "No payout. You can have the assets." "No extra." Victoria tried to probe the why. "Mr. Walker," she said, "it's unusual to concede this much without compensation. Are you hiding something? Undisclosed income?" "Offshore accounts," I almost smiled. "No." Harper's impatience saved me. She snapped, "Stop interrogating him. Just get it done." Victoria's eyes flicked to Harper annoyance, maybe concern, then back to me. "You're requesting expedited transfer of title?" She asked Harper. "Yes," Harper said. "I want everything finalized, immediately." There it was. The obsession with speed. The need to lock the win in before the universe could interfere. Miles slid a draft agreement across the table. He'd inserted language that made responsibilities clear, and he looked at me for confirmation. I nodded. Harper barely read it. She initialed like she was clicking accept on a software update. At the end of the meeting, Harper stood, smoothed her blouse, and said, "This will be the easiest thing you've ever done, Dylan, signing away your life." I watched her walk out, Victoria trailing behind. Miles leaned close and said, "You're sure?" I answered with the only thing that mattered. "She's demanding a timeline that benefits me." Because once you understand that divorce is part emotion and part paperwork, you start to see what most people miss. Sometimes, the person who screams loudest isn't the one with power. They're just the one trying to outrun consequences. Court day set up, the hallway, the smiles, the cameras in people's eyes the morning of the final hearing. The courthouse felt like a place where time moved differently. The air was colder inside than it should have been, like the building was refrigerated to keep emotions from spoiling. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, shoes clicked on tile. People whispered in corners with the intensity of confession. Miles met me near a vending machine that sold stale chips and bad coffee. He looked at me, searching my face for any sign I'd changed my mind. He'd done his best to talk me out of this, to protect me the way a good lawyer protects a client. From himself? "You good?" he asked. "I'm good," I said, and I meant it. Harper arrived like she was stepping onto a stage. She wore a cream-colored coat and heels that made her sound important with every step. Her hair was perfect. Her makeup was camera-ready. She looked around the hallway with a smile that suggested she expected an audience. Victoria Sloan walked beside her, carrying a slim briefcase, her expression neutral. But her eyes were alert, scanning the room, noticing everything, my posture, Miles' stance, the clerk's movements. Victoria was the only one in that hallway who didn't assume Harper had already won. She was waiting for the catch. Harper saw me and smiled wide, the kind of smile people wear in photos after they've crossed a finish line. She didn't speak at first. She just held my gaze like she wanted me to feel small. I didn't look away. I'd learned years ago that eye contact is its own kind of contract. Whoever breaks it first admits weakness. "You look tired," Harper said finally, her voice sweet as a knife. "Long week," I replied. She laughed softly. "Don't worry, it'll all be over soon." That sentence could have been comforting. Coming from Harper, it sounded like a victory chant on the bench near the courtroom doors. Ethan, my best friend since high school, sat with his arms crossed, jaw tight. He'd insisted on coming, partly to support me, partly to make sure I didn't do something stupid. When he saw Harper, his eyes narrowed. He pulled me aside. "Dylan, man, last chance. Tell me you're not actually giving her the house." "I am," I said. Ethan threw his hands up. "You're out of your mind." I didn't argue. Explaining would have taken too long, and explaining to Ethan wasn't the goal. The goal was timing. Across the hallway, Harper was talking to Victoria in a low voice, pointing subtly toward me, toward Miles, toward the doors. I couldn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. I'd lived with Harper long enough to know. Her rhythm? She was savoring the moment, replaying it in her head like a highlight reel. A clerk opened the courtroom doors and called our case. People shifted. Conversations cut off. The world narrowed to paperwork and procedure. As we walked in, I noticed something small. Victoria checked her phone again, then frowned for half a second before smoothing her expression. It was the first visible crack in her control. Harper didn't notice. She was focused on the judge's bench, on the official seal, on the idea of her win being stamped into public record. We took our places. Miles sat close, whispering reminders about how to answer questions. Harper sat upright, hands folded, like the model student about to receive a gold star. The judge entered, everyone stood, then sat. The judge's voice was steady, almost bored, because to the court, our tragedy was paperwork stacked between other tragedies, and I felt a strange calm settle into my chest. Not the calm of surrender, the calm of someone watching a plan reach its final step, because once the signatures happened, there would be no undo button. Harper wanted everything. In a few minutes. She was going to get a . And then she was going to learn what everything really meant. On the drive to the courthouse, I didn't listen to music. I listened to the engine hum and the tires on asphalt because noise felt like a distraction. I kept replaying one memory, Harper standing in our kitchen, telling me she wanted everything, and the way her eyes never once flicked to my face to see if I was okay. She wasn't leaving a marriage. She was collecting spoils. At a red light. My phone buzzed. It was my mom. I didn't answer. Not because I didn't love her, but because I couldn't carry her fear on top of my own focus. I texted, "I'm okay, I'll call after." Then I turned the phone face down. Inside the courthouse, I noticed other couples. Some were crying, some were shouting. Some sat in silence, staring at the floor like they were waiting for surgery. I realized how lucky and unlucky I was at the same time. Lucky because I wasn't blindsided. Unlucky because being prepared doesn't make it hurt less, it just makes it cleaner. Ethan stayed nearby, watching Harper like she was a threat. He whispered, "She's acting like she's at a fashion show." I didn't respond, but I understood. Harper used presentation as armor. If she looked confident, she could convince herself she was safe. When the clerk called us in, my heart didn't race. It slowed. That surprised me. It was like my body knew the worst part uncertainty was about to end. Whatever happened after the hearing would be concrete. And I've always been better with concrete than chaos. The hearing begins. Dylan signs everything over. The judge began reading the terms of the settlement with the neutral cadence of a person, reciting whether, assets, titles, responsibilities, transfers, deadlines. The words sounded clinical, but I could feel Harper's excitement radiating off her like heat. Marital residence to be awarded to the respondent, the judge said. That was Harper. Harper's lips twitched upward. She glanced at me like she wanted to see pain. 2 vehicles to be awarded to the respondent, the judge continued. The black SUV and the silver sedan. Harper's smile widened. Her lawyers. Pen moved quickly, making notes. Miles' jaw tightened. The judge turned a page. Retirement account remains with the petitioner. That was me. Harper barely reacted. Like the 401k was a toy I could keep to feel better. Then came the stack of documents. They slid across the table, one after another, and the court clerk positioned them in front of me with a practiced motion. Miles leaned in close. "Dylan," he whispered, one last attempt. "If you're wrong about this," I met his eyes. "I'm not," I whispered back. The clerk pointed. I picked up the pen. Signing divorce paperwork feels nothing like signing a check. A check is a number. A signature on court documents is a declaration. This is the life we're choosing, and we accept the consequences. I signed the deed transfer first. My hand didn't shake. The pen moved smoothly, like it had been waiting for this. Harper watched the pen tip, eyes bright. It was the look of someone who believed she was watching a door. Open to a better future. Next was the title transfer for the SUV, then the sedan, then household furnishings, then the agreements that listed who was responsible for what, when, and how. I signed everything over. People later told me my face looked empty, like I didn't care. That wasn't it. Inside, I was listening. I was listening for the moment the world would shift. When the last signature dried, Harper let out a breath that sounded like relief and triumph at the same time. She turned to Victoria, their eyes meeting in a quick flash of celebration. Then Harper looked at me again and smiled, full, satisfied, almost glowing. "Good choice," she mouthed, barely moving her lips like she didn't want anyone else. To hear her gloating, I didn't respond. I didn't need to, because at that exact moment, a bailiff approached our table with a thin envelope. It wasn't dramatic, no music cue. Just paper delivered the way paper always arrives, quietly, like it's not about to change someone's life. The bailiff handed it to Victoria. Victoria opened it, scanned the contents, and for the first time since I'd met her, her expression slipped. Not panic, just a flicker of calculation gone wrong. She glanced at Harper. Harper was still smiling, still basking. Victoria leaned toward her client, shielding her mouth with her hand the way lawyers do in movies, and she whispered 5 words. The IRS lien took effect. Harper's smile froze. For a second, she didn't understand. Confusion slid across her face like a shadow, then realization hit. Her eyes went wide, her breath caught. And the sound that came out of her wasn't a gasp. It was a scream. "What?" Harper shouted, loud enough that heads turned, even the judges. The judge frowned. "Ma'am, you will control yourself in my courtroom." Harper didn't hear him. She was staring at Victoria like her lawyer had betrayed her, then at me like I'd stabbed her. You, she choked out, voice shaking with fury. Dylan, what did you do? I looked at her, calm as still water. I gave you everything you asked for, I said. Harper lunged half out of her chair, and Victoria grabbed her arm, trying to keep her seated. Miles sat back slowly, his face changing from dread to something like stunned understanding. The courtroom was suddenly very quiet. Except for Harper's ragged breathing, Harper had wanted a win. What she'd actually demanded was a burden with my signature removed from it, and now she was trapped holding the prize. After Harper screamed, the judge's patience wore thin. Counsel, he said, looking at Victoria, if your client cannot maintain decorum, we will recess. Victoria stood quickly. Your Honor, my client is surprised by new information. We'll address it outside. Harper tried to speak again, but Victoria squeezed her arm hard enough that Harper stopped, breath shaking. The judge gave a final warning, then proceeded. Because courts don't care about your personal collapse. As we stood to leave, Harper hissed at me through clenched teeth. You think you're clever? I looked at her, and for a moment I saw the woman I'd married, the one who laughed on rooftops and told me her dreams. Then it vanished behind something harder. I think I'm careful, I replied in the hallway. Harper's voice dropped into a frantic whisper. Undo it, Dylan, undo it. Victoria pulled her toward a side alcove, speaking fast about emergency motions and how liens could maybe be negotiated, how they have to contact an IRS liaison, how they might pursue a release. Harper's head snapped toward me again. This is your mess? Miles stepped between us, protective now, like he finally understood the shape of the game. Ma'am, he said, your settlement is final. Your client demanded these assets. She got them. Harper's face contorted. You knew, she spat at Victoria. You had to know. Victoria's voice stayed cool, but I could hear strain. I asked you to slow down. I asked you for disclosures. You wanted speed. Harper's breath came fast. She looked like someone who jumped into water expecting it to be warm and found ice. I watched, not gloating, just witnessing. That was another lesson I'd learned the hard way. You don't always get closure in love, but you can get clarity. And clarity looks a lot like watching someone confront the consequences of their own choices. Miles leaned close to me. We should go, he said. We walked past the courthouse doors into the cold air, leaving Harper behind with her lawyer and her new everything. The sound of the closing door felt like punctuation. The explanation. What Harper didn't know, step by step. People think a twist like that happens because someone is a genius or a monster. The truth is less glamorous. It happens because someone reads the fine print, asks the boring questions, and refuses to let pride make decisions. After we were dismissed, Harper stormed into the hallway, still shaking. Victoria tried to pull her aside, speaking fast, low, urgent. Harper shrugged her off like a child refusing medicine. What does that even mean? Harper hissed. What lien? Why now? Victoria kept her voice controlled. It means an IRS lien has attached to the property interests. You now hold the timing. Harper snapped. You said this was clean. Victoria's eyes flashed. I said we were getting the assets you demanded. I didn't say the assets were free of obligations. I asked about disclosures. I asked about filings. You insisted we move fast. Harper turned toward me, eyes blazing. You set me up. I didn't raise my voice. Harper, you set yourself up. You wanted everything. You didn't ask what everything included. She stared at me like she wanted to spit fire. So what now? I owe the IRS? For your business? For the house, I corrected. For what's attached to it. Let me break down what Harper didn't know, step by step, the way my CPA and I mapped it, because this is where the story stops being emotional and starts being mechanical. One, the trophies were real, but so were the strings. Harper saw the house as a prize. But the house wasn't just paint and square footage. It had financial wiring behind the walls, the mortgage and the HELOC. The HELOC was a legal instrument tied to the property, and its clauses cared about responsibility after transfer pending repairs. That foundation crack and aging plumbing weren't someday problems. They were estimates waiting to become bills, the insurance claim. Our storm claim was still in process, and policy language cared about who owned the property when final decisions were made too. The IRS lien wasn't a lightning bolt. It was a calendar. Years ago, back when I was cleaning up an old partner's mess, one quarter got filed late. It was corrected, but the IRS process moved on its own timeline. My CPA and I had already submitted documents and set a resolution path. The crucial detail was when the lien took effect and which name sat on which assets at that moment. My CPA explained it in a sentence I never forgot. The IRS doesn't chase feelings. It chases names. 3. I didn't hide, I documented, and I insulated myself. I made sure the settlement paperwork did 2 things. It showed Harper repeatedly demanded the house and cars, specifically in writing, emails, texts, and negotiation. Notes, she wanted speed. She wanted finality. It established that once the court approved the transfer, the property interest would be hers, meaning obligations attached to that interest would follow the new owner, not the old one, as long as everything was lawful and properly executed. I didn't forge anything. I didn't create the lien. I simply understood how liens behave when ownership changes. Point 4. The thing I kept looked small, but it was the core. Harper mocked my 401k, but that account was protected in ways she didn't understand. More importantly, I kept my company, my contracts, my clients, my clean revenue, because those were the assets that actually build a future. 5. Why I didn't warn her. If I'd warned Harper, she would have pivoted, demanded cash, demanded parts of my business, demanded anything. Shiny without risk. After months of threats and manipulation, I wasn't obligated to rescue her from her own greed. I wasn't trying to ruin her. I was trying to survive her. In the hallway, Harper's scream collapsed into bargaining. Dylan? Okay. We can renegotiate. Just help me fix this. I looked at her and felt not triumph, not hate, just clarity. No, I said quietly, we're done. Miles walked me out into the cold air. He didn't speak for a beat, then said, You weren't giving up? No, I answered. I was letting her take what she wanted. I didn't leave that courthouse with the house or the cars, but I left with my future, detached from her hunger, and for the first time in months, I could breathe. That evening, my phone lit up with missed calls. Harper left one voicemail that started angry and ended shaky. You can't do this. We built this together. It was the first time in months she'd said, together, like it wasn't a tactic, on the way to my temporary place. I drove past our old neighborhood to close the loop in my head. The porch light was on, windows glowing. From the curb, the house looked like the version Harper loved, stable, expensive, effortless, yet I could finally see how much of that picture had been pressure. When I got home, I called my mom back. Are you okay? She asked. I told her, I'm not happy, but I'm safe. I didn't drown her in details. I just said, I chose my future. After a long silence, she whispered, Then I'm proud of you. I slept without dreaming of arguments that whole night. The next morning, Ethan texted, I was wrong. I'm sorry. I didn't answer right away. I made coffee, opened my laptop, and watched my business dashboard turn green. Trucks moving, orders scanning, life continuing. That was my real house, even after my marriage collapsed. Now I want to hear from you. If you were in my shoes, would you have fought the traditional way, or would you have let her win the way I did? Drop your take in the comments. If this story hit you, please like, subscribe, share, and tell me where you're watching from. Thanks for watching, and I hope your next chapter is calmer, cleaner, and truly yours.